Hey Clariphiles and Clariphilettes, in this video I'm going to share some information that might be helpful to some of you would-be teachers out there. If you're interested in ever teaching the clarinet or even learning the clarinet better yourself, hang on, I might have something beneficial for you. Well, most of you may or may not know, but I'm a big fan of Gilbert Chesterton. Gilbert Keith Chesterton, as a matter of fact, better known as G.K. Chesterton. And one of the things that I really liked that Chesterton constantly emphasized was in discussing a subject to begin at the beginning. He says most people start discussing a subject mid-sentence. Well, I can certainly see that from my own life teaching of the clarinet years ago. And that's what I commonly find to be not just, the exception, but actually the rule. Most teachers actually begin teaching the clarinet mid-sentence. What do I mean by that? Well, the first thing the teacher begins teaching the student is basically how to make the sound, how to hold the mouth, how to blow the air through the horn, and they do it by various methods, just playing the mouthpiece only or the mouthpiece and barrel. Then they add the clarinet and so on and so forth. And so to me that is beginning mid-sentence. The teacher's duty is to answer two questions for the students. And generally I find they only answer one question for the student. And the question they answer is the question as how to play the clarinet. How to play the clarinet. How do you hold your mouth? How do you do the air? How do you do this? How do you finger that note? And so on and so forth. Well, that's all fine and dandy. But they don't really explain what the clarinet should sound like. They make a sound, but they have no idea what kind of sound they're really making. And that's where the teacher comes in. And I'm going to discuss that particular thing that needs to be taught, what the student is trying to do. And you'll see that it will help the student make a lot of progress if you can clarify that issue along with how to do it. Let me begin my explanation by a certain analogy. Let's say you were in the dark and you couldn't see anything at all, but all you could hear was a certain voice, and the voice was saying, put your left foot one step forward, now put your right foot one step forward, now put your left foot over toward the left, and so every bit of progress that you gained, hopefully walking toward the light, listening to the voice, every bit of progress you gained by step, by step, by step, by step instructions. Without the voice, you didn't really know what to do. And you didn't know whether the next step was a right or wrong step, taking you toward the light or away from the light. Well, if you saw the light for a moment, a beam of light, even if it's a very small beam of light, you would be able to make a lot of progress on your own without ever listening to the voice, but having only to recourse to the voice just occasionally. You could definitely make a lot of progress on your own because you would see that the light is getting larger or getting smaller by the steps that you took. Well, that's what answering the first question actually does for you, is it begins to give you a sense of light on the inside of your head and your ear as to what you're actually trying to do. When I gave workshops years ago, I used to ask the students, what is a characteristic clarinet sound? And they would look at me a lot like a caveman would a pocket calculator. Well, as odd as they thought I was, I would continue on, and I'd say, well, here we are, we've been playing the clarinet, many of you have been playing the clarinet for 4 or 5 years, and you have no idea what the clarinet should really sound like. What is a characteristic clarinet tone? You know what, say, a characteristic of birds are when you think of them. They have feathers, or they fly, or frogs hop, and so on and so forth. But what is a characteristic clarinet sound? They would have no idea. they had never been given the instructions as to what they were actually trying to achieve with the sound. And you know, when I heard them warming up before we began the workshop, it really showed, because they had no idea what the clarinet should really sound like in terms of its very characteristic sound. So I would explain to them that they can actually see shapes with their ears. And I would play, on my clarinet, I would play a very focused sound with a good high tongue position, the way a good classical clarinet player would play. And then I would play the next sound with slower air and with the tongue position low and forward, so the sound was very washed out, very uncentered. You might say the outer parameters of the sound were very kind of blurry and murky and hazy and all that. Then I would ask him, if these were two photographs, which one, number one or number two, which one would be in sharp focus and which one would be all blurry so you couldn't really see what the objects were. And I would get almost 100% agreement as to which was the focused sound, which was the very well-defined sound, and which one was the unfocused, hazy, and blurry one. And I would begin teaching characteristic clarinet sound, not from color, which is a very murky, subjective kind of thing, but from the shape of the sound. Once they got to hear a concentrated, focused shape, then I would begin to tell them how to do that, which is with a high back tongue position. As the tongue goes higher and back, it makes the air move faster. It also raises the pitch, concentrates the sound. That's how they should be going about achieving it. But what they're trying to achieve with that is the thing that they lack. They lack that picture, and that's one of the things that I tried to give them in the short time that I was with them. And it almost never failed that within 15 or 20 minutes of beginning this whole process of listening and the tongue position and listening for the concentrated sound and all that, that the whole clarinet section was transformed in the evenness of the sound, in the fullness of the sound, in the carrying of the sound, because they had finally gotten the first step of information that they needed. They needed to know what they were trying to achieve, not just how to achieve it. And all of a sudden, the clarinet section was transformed. Now, this is just, of course, rudimentary, very rudimentary. What's needed beyond that is something that the teacher needs to insist on just as much as a student playing scales or arpeggios or doing any kind of practice at all. And we're going to talk about that next. What the teacher needs to do is to insist that the clarinet students begin to listen to really fine clarinet playing and to begin to discuss and talk about the clarinet playing, how they like the player's sound, what kind of sound they think it is, whether they can hear the tongue position, whether they can hear the consistency of the sound from note to note and register to register, to begin to listen analytically with the ear. You know, all the musicians that were the best musicians in the music schools when I was going to school back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, all the best musicians were not just great players on their instrument, but they were enthusiastic music lovers and music listeners, and they listened to all kinds of music. They developed a love of music, and they also were able to integrate into their own playing various styles of performing, various styles of phrasing and nuance that they didn't get from clarinet players. They got from others. And of course, as a clarinet player, I did a lot of that. I actually did my master's thesis on vocal music on the Opus 33 of Brahms, Die Schöne Magelone, a song, not really a song cycle, it's romances. But the students need to listen to that, but they'll always develop, you might say, kind of affinity for a certain clarinet player or a certain style of clarinet playing. And of course, this will develop and grow as the student listens and becomes more critical as far as a listener. And for me, that clarinet player was Harold Wright. I never heard a clarinet player that I loved how elegantly he phrased and how beautifully he played the clarinet. anything that even approximated what Wright did musically. Technically, yes, there were guys that were really fantastic. There are guys that are phenomenal now, technically. But in terms of the elegance and just the aristocratic beauty of the sound and the phrasing, Harold Wright was it for me. And as a clarinet player, I'd say I developed much more in that direction than any other direction. But students will have their own preferences according to their own nature and tastes, but that taste has to be developed. That critical listening faculty has to be developed. And that is probably the most neglected single thing. The ear has to be educated along with the technique. And the ear will always be advance of the technique and always be beckoning the technique to get better, to get better. So rather than the teacher pushing the student from behind, the student's own critical faculties developed will be pulling his own or her own skills, ahead, saying, come on, catch up. You're not doing the things that I hear, that I want in the sound. So this is the critical part of education that is neglected, and I can't stress it enough of how it's not ancillary. It's not an option. It's something that is absolutely essential that clarinet teachers must do if they want their students to become autodidactic, if they want their students to make quick progress, and if they want their students to develop correctly behind their nose. They have to be getting this idea up in their head and in their ears of what things should sound like to demand that things behind the nose go the right way. If they don't, they'll begin to think that a real characteristic sound is their stand partner, and that is a catastrophe. No, they need to learn to listen critically, and they can help teach one another and help be critical with one another. And that is very beneficial too. So everybody's listening, everybody's helping everybody else to learn. To learn what? To learn what the clarinet should sound like. And so that's my message to you as teachers, is don't neglect this very critical part of getting your students to learn to listen to music, and not just the junk that you hear on the radio all the time, but I mean really listen to fine clarinet playing, and to really listen to fine music, and to begin to learn to listen critically and to listen and integrate those things into their own playing. That will be beneficial for you as a teacher. It will lighten your work, and it will give your students quicker progress. And that's my message until I see you next time. Thanks for listening.